Hi, everyone.
Hi, Emma. Hi, Kharisma.
Hey, Desi.
Hey, Desi.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Joanne.
Hi, Joanne.
Hi, Emma. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Joanna.
Okay, there's still some people filtering in. We'll just give them a minute or two here, and then we can get started. All right, so as we're still letting people in, just wanted to say welcome and thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn. We are recording this discussion, just so you're aware. And we're hosting this as part of our Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week programming, which is a national event that Bethesda Project participates in annually. And we're very excited today to hear from some of our own staff, Kharisma and Stephen, about their takeaways that they had from the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference, which took place over the summer in Washington, D.C. And in addition to today's Lunch and Learn, we also have a number of other activities scheduled for the week, including a raffle fundraiser. We have a cocktail making class on Friday with our partners down the street, Rex at the Royal. We have Jenny's Ice Cream doing a pint drive for us, and lots of community life events and volunteer groups coming through. So I can put the link in the chat if you're interested in some of those other activities. But in the meantime, I will turn it over to both Kharisma and Stephen to introduce themselves and kick us off.
All right. Thank you, Emma. My name is Kharisma Goldston, and I'm the director of Shelter Bethesda Project. Stephen, I'll let you introduce you.
Thanks. My name's Stephen Kotch. I'm the program coordinator at Bethesda Project's My Brother's House down here on South Street.
So we've named this Lunch and Learn Creativity on the Ground Level. And we're going to start with discussing some of our larger takeaways of our time at the conference. And we're going to also open it up for anyone to ask us questions. And we're also going to include how Bethesda Project kind of also fits into this conversation as well. So why the conference? So the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference happens biannually. We typically at Bethesda Project go in the summer. I think it's the largest conference. I think this year, Stephen, there's like over 1,000 people that were in attendance.
1,100 people showed up.
It was a pretty large conference. And the idea around it is there are daily sessions that you kind of choose that fit for your kind of interests. And every year has a particular theme. So this year was focusing on creativity on the ground, creativity in terms of housing, as well as how to shelter older individuals within shelter. Steve and I had a great time. We both tag team different sessions. It was a great opportunity to get to learn about what other states are doing, what other programs are doing. Pennsylvania was kind of a smaller group, surprisingly. And California, there was a ton of people there. So it's a great way to kind of share with your peers about what you're doing in program, what your state is doing at the larger level, and how your city is responding to the homelessness crisis. Stephen?
Absolutely. No, I would echo everything you just said. I had a fantastic time, and I would encourage anyone who has the opportunity to go to the conference. I think it's a unique opportunity, like Kharisma was saying, to sit down with people who are doing the same work or very different work, but in the same field as you. And it was my first time going to the conference. I went in expecting to find fun solutions and answers, which you do get some of. But I think the best thing I took away was more of like this way of proceeding from the conference, where you come back to your site and everything seems more open. There's more space to think, and there's more blanks to fill in. You start having more questions, and I think that's what we're going to get into a lot more today.
Thank you. So the first one we're going to talk about is think outside the box and creating opportunities amidst the affordable housing crisis. We have been in tons of conversations. You can watch in the media. Affordable housing is increasing, more especially in Philadelphia. You can go to neighborhoods now, and it's just new build after new build, and there is not a new stock of affordable housing in PHA. I think this year's waitlist had over 10,000 people that applied because they only had 10,000 slots. And even so, there is no guarantee that you were even going to get housing, even if you were making it to the waitlist. With information like that is really dire. So a lot of the conference focused on how can we be creative. A lot of bad things came from COVID, but I think one of what we don't talk about enough is how COVID allowed us to be creative. And there were some positive aspects. It not only changed how we kind of worked in spaces, it also changed how we respond to crisis, how we respond to information. It also increased our capacity to think outside the box. And we applied that same creativity to housing. So one of the ways that we operate is the goal within Bethesda Project and other providers is not only to end homelessness, but also to make sure that it is a permanent option, that people are stably housed. We do recognize just because you're housed does not mean it's permanent or it is stable, and that is always our goal. We want to reduce the times an individual returns back into homelessness. So one of those great solutions is housing shares. I think some of us kind of can look back at our time and think about roommates that we had in college, postgraduate, or even housemates. And it is a great way to reduce the cost of housing, and it also increases the community. So what we've done and what other parts are doing is actually pairing people up within shelter, within programs to say, these two people are very, very similar. They're really good friends. Have you considered moving in together? And when you look at the cost of maybe a one-bedroom apartment, let's say it's $1,100, one person paying $1,100 is excessive, especially for individuals that are low income or have subsidized income. When you kind of combine that with, well, you and your friend can live together, it's $1,100, suddenly you're not paying $1,100 and now you're paying $550 per person. Not to mention, you're also splitting utilities, you're splitting food costs. So overall, these actually reduce the overall cost that individuals are putting out for housing.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say along the lines of that, something that stuck out to me was that housing first is not just housing. I think that's what Kharisma is saying a little bit about. It needs to be permanent. It needs to be wraparound. It needs to be sort of like a braid in which all these services are working together to ensure that that stability of housing is maintained. So that's something I keep coming back to over and over again now that I'm back, is housing first is not just housing, and how can we implement more than just housing into our main goal and their main goal, and whatever that might be.
Within that also, we have looked at the reunification. I think that's always a great option. During COVID and the concern of COVID, individuals were more likely to take in family members that wasn't an option before, especially our folks that are older. They were more likely to talk to their other, maybe their children, their adult children, or talk to their siblings. And we had a lot of family members saying, hey, you can live with me, we can make it work. Although within shelters, we saw a decrease in individuals seeking shelter, and we ourselves had a decrease in numbers of people that we had in program. It does not mean that people stopped experiencing homelessness, but we saw other options could work, and they're also equally sustainable. So even, within all of our programs, we've had individuals that have moved into with families, and they're still housed with these people today. And, we're looking at nearly 4 years later, which is wild. And looking at that being as a success, that's highly successful. It increases family relationships, personal relationships, and the person is not coming back into shelter. Also within Bethesda Project, we have SROs, and SROs continue to be a fantastic option. SROs are single room occupancy, and they're a great way. One of the providers, and I believe in California or Nevada, they got funding to renovate an entire hotel room and open up as an SRO. So for an option that was limited, now I think they opened up 50 to 60 units and looking to kind of expand that. So, you have these abandoned properties, and instead of making it, and it's an entire individual apartment, make it an SRO, and you end people's episode of homelessness.
I think one thing.
Sorry.
I think one thing to highlight there too, is they speaking about kind of SROs, but more on the shelter side, is kind of the housing first perspective of a shelter. And I think that I want to highlight our Oxford space at this time, because I think it's just very important. I think that we're on the front lines of kind of this radical approach to housing first shelter, where it's non-congregate, they have privacy, they have quiet, but they're still being engaged with case management and with the goal of finding permanent housing in the future. So I do think that it's important to note that that Oxford is a great new program that Bethesda has that's working along those lines that we heard at the conference.
Thanks, Stephen. And our little social media plug. Another really popular and kind of at the forefront are tiny homes and RV homes. RV homes are more common in areas that kind of have RVs. So Florida was a huge proponent of that. Parts of the Midwest actually were too, and they were really great options because these are self-sustaining homes. There are lots of kind of parks that are also offering long-term leases for individuals as well. And they're just kind of like leasing the space, but they have electricity and water hookup to end people's homelessness. And again, tiny homes. That is a kind of a recent debate. There are a lot of kind of startup companies that are looking to kind of figure out how can you build a large amount of tiny homes in a very cost-effective way. Because they can sometimes be just as costly as, traditional full-size homes. But it's a company called Boxable. And I think they're in actually Las Vegas too. And they're looking to kind of manufacture at a factory setting all of these tiny homes. So again, housing is not just a traditional, like a 1-bedroom apartment, a single, or a studio or a house. It's looking at how many times, what other options are there to housing, and how sustainable are they? Are they permanent? And honestly, it's becoming very popular to look at those options. So we're gonna kind of, sorry.
I think too, on just like the creativity aspect, as we're being so creative, I think it's important to keep the data, and the data needs to back up how that creativity is going and if it works and if it doesn't work. And that's the only way that we're going to get to a place where all these creative ideas are being fleshed out and used at a bigger scale. And I think that also goes along with one of the major points of the conference, which was advocacy. Because I think, at least for me, it was easy to sit there and hear all of this creativity talk and think, where are the resources where I do this? What do I use to be creative with? But they really, really drove home the point of advocacy, that we need to use our voices, not just for our clients, but for our programs, on macro levels, and the policyholders and government institutions, and making sure that we do get the resources when we have the data that backs it up, with the creative, engaging things that we're doing with folks.
I appreciate the plug. I'm sure our director of compliance evaluation would love to push for more data. Hi, Michelle. All for you. We're going to kind of switch gears to really talk about the populations we're actually serving. So within the past several years, we've also noticed an increase of people that are over the age of like 55 and 60 also entering shelter. And I think that's a prime moment to kind of highlight like Oxford as well. We're having people that are older seeking shelter, and that comes with its own unique needs. Within our Brother's Place, I think our youngest age right now is 18, and our eldest is about 75, 80. When you have those massive age ranges, it's not a one size fits all. At the conference, it highlights it's not a one size fits all. The things that someone in their 20s or 30s are able to do, you may not be able to do as easily at like 50, 60, or even 70, and you might have other health challenges. So they were highlighting that assisting older adults into homelessness, it is a recurring problem. Older adults can be priced out with either taxes and they're on set income. You can't always easily work or find a job. You may not have skills that are kind of easy applied to maybe jobs that maybe are more physical demanding. And they were saying that also older folks may not have family. They may not have any social supports. Location of the shelter is important. You're going to be close to your doctors, close to your primaries, close to individuals that are, maybe a medical support team. And shelters are looking to become like a care home. And how do we kind of reverse that effect of that? They've also added that seniors are also facing financial issues, maybe financial abuse from other participants in the program, being taken care of. Their medication is a problem. And also there's also physical issues. Again, also abuse is a huge issue with older adults in shelters. Medical conditions, if you have an oxygen tank or you have a lot of like medical devices, it can be hard to find the physical space for those items. And the facility just isn't equipped to meet their needs. Whether location, in Pennsylvania, there's a shelter that is in the far northeast, and from the bus stop to the door of the shelter, I believe it's a quarter of a mile walk, if not 3/4 of a mile, if not a full mile. For someone who's in their 70s, and there's no other transportation onto the property beyond that walk. For someone who's a senior, that is a nearly impossible task, especially as we get into the winter months. So it's looking at who is willing to help and how should actually responding to that. And I'm gonna turn over to Stephen to talk more about Oxford and how we're responding to seniors in shelter and that increasing need.
Good afternoon. Let me ask you one question. Good afternoon, everyone. I had one question. Now that you mentioned that this is my first time, by the way, that I joined this meeting.
Hi.
And the reason I am here is because I have 2 daughters there, in college at Drexel, and I am, voluntary, in some other organization, and I want to learn more about the Bethesda Project. Something that I really like it when I was planning to make a donation is that you guys have, the wish list in Amazon, right? So now that you mentioned, right, that, the population, right, is over 55, so there are some medication or some device or something that you guys need some support. So one suggestion that I would like to add is that you guys could also put that, what is needed beside that list that is in Amazon. Now that Amazon also offer, medication through, I believe, World Food. So I personally, one of my daughters, she's studying UX designers, to the web page. So she could help you out, voluntary or something like that. You know what I mean? So you guys could use the resources. So I will suggest that medication that you're missing, you could add that in the platform. That's one suggestion. If needed, for example, some devices or medical equipment. For example, in my company, I will put my flexible spending account. I probably for this year, I will not use all money, but I will be happy to donate. I will be happy to donate some of that money that I will not use that. So you guys could promote that too. You know what I mean? Because where we are located, I am located in a Westchester area. It's a very highly educated area, populated area. So you guys have to, use the web to communicate what you really need. And I am here because I came to this country, I got my education, I was able to pay education for my daughter. I am very proud to be an American. And somehow, this is a new generation or American who want to make something good, how we could find the tool to help each other.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And there's a larger conversation with that. But on a brief level, I will say part of addressing older folks' needs, we have some really good community partners for the medication aspect where, if you don't have insurance, we're able to call certain pharmacies and they're able to send over the medication. But in terms of the support, we can always use more support. So I'll also get your information. We can connect after. And I can also forward it to Tina and Emma.
And just a side note, we will have some time at the end for questions. So if you can hold it or put it in the chat, we'll try to address them at the end as well. Thanks.
Good.
So I think we were discussing Oxford site and how it pertains to like how it's kind of doing a new thing, at least in Philadelphia. So Oxford site is specifically for older adults. It's, I believe, 65 plus. I believe there's 40 beds there. Everyone gets their own room and they share like a Jack and Jill bathroom with the person across the bathroom from them. So it's really a space where you get your four walls, you get quiet, you can come and go as you please, essentially, as long as it's, reasonable hours. And yeah, so it's a space that was taken over by Bethesda right as COVID was kind of winding down. It used to be a COVID prevention site, but now they've kind of transitioned it to a specifically older adults space for people experiencing homelessness in Philadelphia. So it's becoming a really important resource across Philadelphia, but even specifically for Bethesda Project. I can speak to my site, my brother's house specifically. When we do have folks that are over 60, 65, it starts to become that conversation where, is this the right space for them? And just to what Kharisma was talking about, medications, ability to use stairs, Oxford has an elevator, they have wheelchair accessible entrances. And that's not to say that MBH should not get those things in due time. That might be something down the road, but we don't have that currently. So it's something that we're not in a position to support those folks adequately. And having Oxford as an option has been an incredible difference in their lives, but also just our programs and how they're functioning, because we're getting them to where they need to be. So I think Oxford's been indispensable in our time so far, and I hope that more programs start coming that are using that Oxford model, so that we can get the older folks where they need to get to.
Yeah, in addition to that, how Bethesda kind of fits into this, within our brother's place, so we serve about 149 men every single night, and during the winter season, we increase those numbers. And we will take anyone, at any hour. We've had calls at 2:00 in the morning. Hey, this person is on the train. They're older. They're really frail. Can you take them? And my rule always is yes. We'll figure it out later, because we do. But that's a project. We figure it out. The goal is to get people safely off the streets into shelter and then move them to housing. So the language is also important. We look for and this across the entire board. It's not only through shelter, but entry level and also our housing sites. The language that we use while we treat seniors, while we support them. At our brother's place, we talk about taking a financial advantage of others. We talk to guests that may not recognize that they're being taken advantage of financially. We talk about the importance of keeping your PIN safe. Be careful who you walk with. I know across all sites, there are case managers that are willing to support all of our guests and residents securely keep the bank account, not sharing it with others. We also have, depends on site. And at our brother's place, we don't call them depends. We call them like medical underwear, because sometimes that physical transition is hard for folks. So what we aim to do is create more inclusive language to recognize that as our population continues to age, it requires more creative ways to honor their dignity. And that's always the goal. I'm not going to say, hey, you want a pair of Depends? I'll say, hey, I have a private little bag in my office. If you want to refill them, it's in our medication room, and here's how you can get them. So the person feels like they have more privacy, they have more autonomy, they can ask for these things securely, and we have all sizes. So it's another way of looking at our senior needs.
Right. It's all about compassion towards that individual, which I think goes back to staff training. As we see these new needs being presented, we need to train our staff appropriately so that they can support these folks with the necessary tool set to do that. Yeah, and that's something I think Bethesda's working towards actively, especially at my site, where we're trying to make training a much more integral part of every staff member's employment here, so that all of our clients are getting served well.
So Stephen didn't mention this, but he should, and I'm gonna call him out there. Stephen has a great acupuncture.
Yeah.
Is it Friday?
Friday.
We don't have to reinvent wheels. There are other great providers that we have really great partnerships with to also come into a program meet our needs.
The best parts of the conference was being able to come back and say to myself, well, maybe there's a ton of other resources in this city that I haven't even thought about engaging with. So yeah, that's exactly one of them. There's an acupuncture free clinic that happens at the Stephen Klein Wellness Center. It's up in North Philly every Friday. So at least for the last 2 months, we've been driving up a good 5 to 6 people per Friday to get acupuncture done. It's specifically a procedure tailored towards like addiction and cravings. So that's really specifically helping the guys at MBH. And hopefully it turns into a larger conversation of how can Bethesda get specific funding from whoever to have acupuncture on site, and maybe make that across all of the Bethesda sites, because it seems to be really taking hold. But that's just to say, yeah, the conference gives you a great way to come back and explore different resources and then try to present those to the guys here.
So now we're going to kind of switch gears and turn it over to, I think, our favorite part of just questions, initial thoughts from all of you who kind of heard us speak briefly.
Or if there's a topic you thought we might mention, but we haven't, you want to pick our brains and see if we know anything.
I have a question. I'm interested in the whole tiny home concept. I read an article not too long ago about one in LA, and the folks who weren't behind it, I forget what the issues were. I think one was that it's relatively expensive per square foot, and what was another that folks don't want it in their backyard kind of thing, because it seemed on the face like a solution that was when I first read it, I thought, well, what a perfect solution. What more did you learn about that, if anything, other than what you said?
First thing that came to my brain is you hit it right on the head with the location of it. I think that was the biggest takeaway, is the community's agreement to have those present.
A lot of it's also like zoning, and those zoning boards are really difficult to go against. And when you couple that with a community, and I think you said it literally, the not in my backyard, that NIMBYism is so detrimental, and that could sometimes be a kind of like a, excuse the language, like a death blow to moving forward with those in certain neighborhoods. But you know, some locations say you can have one, but it can't be a permanent residence. You can have this, but you can only live in it from this time to this time. And I think that only makes it harder. And I think when we think about affordable housing, there are sometimes misconceptions that come with it, and who needs affordable housing. So the best way to kind of push against that is to really push against those zoning boards, push against that, that's the advocacy aspect of this is a great solution. And although they can be expensive, like I said, there are companies that are actively working to reduce the cost of those. So it's really looking at those companies and like offering support.
Agreed.
Thanks.
I think it was Liz, and then it was Tina, then Liz. Thank you again for the question, David.
Thanks, Kharisma. So I want to say hello to everyone as the CEO. I was a little late joining. I thought I had a conflict, but it got resolved. So I'm pleased to be here. And I'm really grateful to Kharisma and Stephen for sharing their takeaways with everyone. I just want to comment on Dave's question. There is a group that's really working in Philadelphia to try and combat some of the zoning issues. And they're looking at it from a more expansive view as personal dwelling units. And a lot of the work is around trying to make sure that our zoning laws aren't restrictive for things like adding on a component of someone's home for like an in-law suite once someone has mobility issues, or tacking on sort of a version of a tiny home to an existing property that can be used for a family member or a rental, because right now it's really not possible. But there is a group that's actively working within Philadelphia to try and address that. And there is a nonprofit that's working to open up the first tiny house village in Philly. I think it's called Sanctuary Village. And actually a member of our board, Hazalita Hayes, is involved with that group. So you might want to talk to Hazalita to learn more about that. But I did have a question for the two presenters, kind of tapping on to this innovation. I saw Jeffrey put some innovation comment in the chat. What was the most innovative kind of program or idea that you heard of that really made you say, wow, that's really cool, or I never thought of that, and that's really interesting? Did anything really stick out to you? whether we could do it in Philly or not.
Sure. I mean, I think right off the top of my head was more of like the centering of narratives and the storytelling aspect and just like hearing different stories. So specifically, they presented a movie called Lift, and it centered around, I forget the details, but it was a person in New York who experienced homelessness as a child. They had a program that linked him with a ballet school in New York. He turned out to be one of the greatest ballet dancers of our generation and has returned to be a director of that ballet house in New York, but also working in that program. So it was his first time going back to the youth homelessness program ballet school. So it was just seeing his trauma present itself, but also in a very beautiful way where he's working with these kids to tell their story as it is right now. So that one really struck for me. It made me come back to my site and really a refresher in viewing everybody again as a human being. And to see kind of like the generational aspect in that movie, you had the parents of the children, you had him who was a child and is now a great success. There's just many, many narratives happening there. And it was a reminder to come back into this space and start hearing those narratives.
So there were two. So one was I spoke with the director of the program that was converting that like an old hotel motel into an SRO, and like hearing that the cost of that. I think, you know, this is my anti-Airbnb spiel for just a moment. Airbnb has really changed the affordable housing and has really created a serious low stock. And, you know, during the pandemic, there were a lot of those small hotels that closed and they're abandoned. So I think just looking at, wait, a hotel room could be an SRO. Those do have large kitchens. They do have their own bathroom. You can lock the front door. I think looking at it from that aspect, it's, why don't we keep doing that? The rooms are already set up as an SRO. It's just really updating it. The structures are often very, 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 very sound. So I would love if, you know, especially the 2 floors. And I think even like near Philadelphia, if you're coming into Philadelphia through Jersey, you can pass a couple of hotels near the highway that kind of speak to individuals that are kind of near level of homelessness, and they have like monthly rates. And when you actually look at that and know that that's a long-term housing option. So just kind of converting that and having nonprofits take over that space, I think would be great, because a lot of the cost is already kind of built in. You're not building a hotel from the ground up. But they also had the author of Made. That was a movie on Netflix. I think Stephanie Rand is her name. Please excuse me if I butcher that. And in watching the Made series and hearing her talk, when we see homelessness from a step back, it's like, oh, this is so obvious. If one person just gave that person a chance, like if this just worked out, it could help this person. And it's like, we know this, but yet every day people are in our program that haven't had that opportunity. They haven't had that intervention space. So although that film and that book really was hard to watch, because you're seeing a single mom experience domestic violence, experiencing homelessness, and what you have to do to sacrifice to make it work. And even if you do all of that, it still doesn't work out, you know, and that's exactly who we're serving, is people who sometimes have tried everything and they're like, it's still not working. So like Steven said, like that just kind of put that refocus of a lot of people experiencing homelessness are not experiencing it because they choose to. They don't want to. They aren't, you know, being defiant. They're being difficult. Their drug and alcohol use and mental health is just that. It's just an aspect of part of them. But it's sometimes through things that are completely out of their control. And they need our support to recognize that they're still human. They're still a person. They still have rights and dignity. They just need support from our program. Thank you. Liz?
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to just jump in real quick to follow up on stuff regarding the tiny home movement, because during COVID, like when we were in lockdown a lot, I watched a lot of videos of people who were like, you know, having tiny homes and you know, the whole like kit and caboodle. And the thing that I always noticed in a lot of the videos that I was watching of people who they were interviewing that had tiny homes is that they would be like, oh, like I live off my parents' land, or like I live off like this this property that I'm renting. You know what I mean? It's like it doesn't. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, it just doesn't address like you know, the root nature of like people not having homes, right? And which kind of like I was Jeffrey, your comment in the chat I thought was just like really important and apt, is that you know, stuff like tiny homes and stuff are like cute and all that, but like they don't really offer, unfortunately, like the same type of independence that we would like people to have. Whether they're homeless or not, you know, like that unfortunately, because like again, like the issue of like having land to actually own, you know, the property to put your house on for tiny homes is unfortunately not something that is like you know, very well like accepted or feasible, because of like all sorts of like regulatory issues regarding like the size of like the home and stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's just kind of an innovative solution that doesn't really address the root cause of like you know, housing not being more widely affordable or, you know, guaranteed for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's
Yeah.
like the tension for me when I'm in the conference is exactly what Liz just said. But I think what I took away from it was like the two things, advocacy and creativity. So like we have to work with what we have. It has to be a strength-based perspective. We have to ask ourselves, what do we have and how can we use that to best of our advantage? But we also have to advocate more heavily for what we know we need and what we know works. And for some folks, that isn't a tiny house. And for some folks, it is a tiny house. But it's also giving them the option to choose, right? It's not saying everyone's got to live in a tiny house now.
I mean, yeah, so some places, tiny homes were great, but the cost of land is really cheap. But you're right, when you have resources and you build a tiny home, it's not a tiny home, it's just a luxury. The more resources you have, like if you have a lot of financial resources and you took a year off, you're not unemployed, you're just relaxing. Like, you know what I mean? Like we use different words for people who have a lot more resources, especially financially, and we use it to create that separation. But in an area like the Midwest where you're in Tornado Alley, tiny homes are not an option. Those are not the answer. Why you're in Tornado Alley, like it can be devastating. It's just to recognize that that is one other additional solution in the many that we need to be coming up with, because housing really isn't a one size fit all. The access to housing isn't a one size fit all. It's, you have to look at the needs of that individual and find the best housing, because we know if you match people with appropriate housing, they are more likely to be successful long term. You know, I had a client that his mom was really sick, and the housing option that initially was offered to him was so far from her. He said, I'm going to lose this because I cannot risk something happening to my mom and I'm not being there. Thankfully, we were able to work together with this person and find something more appropriate. But someone is telling us this isn't working for me. And we have to hear that. And we even say, you can deny housing if the area is a trigger for you. If it's, you know, the neighborhood, it reminds you of a past event, right? So we consider those aspects to recognize that like housing and its complexities needs to be expanded. But some people may say, I love a good tiny home. I can make it work. I love it. This is mine. No one can tell me elsewhere. I don't need more. And we should recognize like that importance of that works for that person, but that's not a permanent solution for everyone, nor should it be considered a permanent solution for everyone. I think Tina and then William.
Yes.
Oh, you muted.
Yes, thank you. Well, this is what I will suggest is a very short solution for now, but where I live, close by, you know, I volunteer in one place where, you know, they created a shelter because they were a Catholic church that they were no longer in use, right? And I volunteered and they accommodated that Catholic church. You know, as you know, in the 2009, 2010, many, you know, many churches, they were closed out, you know, because they have so many issues. And the archdiocese, they are giving us so many churches. Number one, because many Catholics like myself, they lost their faith or they reencountered. It was very difficult, very tragic moment for, especially for children, and it was very difficult. So the one solution here, not far away where I live in Exton, is that they were found, a local church that they were abandoned. You know what I mean? No abandoned. I don't know. It's part of the archdiocese, and then they accommodated for our local homeless. So I believe there is so many other churches around that, the archdiocese, you guys could explore if they could be donated. You know what I mean? Especially for older families. I think we all know the tragedy of this epidemic. It was difficult. It's broken the heart of our society, and our children and family are impacted psychologically, mentally. So now imagine for older people, it's even more difficult. So as a parent, I struggle how I communicate, how I preach to my older children. So that's why I'm here too. So we had to find a way to identify other solutions. But one suggestion that you guys could consider is that there are so many other churches, place that is abandoned and they are not used. We could accommodate. It's not a, it's a near 10, so it's something that you could explore. I don't know if this is good or not, but it's something that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So Jeffrey actually put it in the chat. So part of our entry-level program, and T. Sanders is the director of our entry-level program. She's here in the chat. Hi, T. But Jeffrey put in more information about all of our locations, including our church shelter program, because we do partner with several churches and have them as a winter initiative or some long-term shelters as well. So I agree with that because we're also working with that. Tina and then Desi.
Thanks, Kharisma. So my question for the two of you at the conference, I've been hearing a new trend where people are looking to use the word unhoused rather than homeless. And I was curious, one, if that was talked about at the conference, if you started hearing that shift in language, and then two, if you had a personal view on that. I was curious.
I don't think they mentioned that at the conference. Kharisma?
They mentioned it briefly in one of the sessions that was client focused and like story focused and person centered.
Yeah.
It wasn't as like widely discussed, which is kind of disappointing. But I will say this, as I'm a fan of, obviously, like I said, language, and I think it's important to rephrase, and it's important. I'm not always perfect, in all honesty. So I make mistakes and say homeless instead of unhoused. But I do think it's important to kind of highlight that. I think it just ensures that the person it's not who they are. You're not someone who is a person who's homeless. You are an individual experiencing homelessness, and you are someone who's experiencing unhousedness. Not necessarily like it. So I think it's more of that descriptor of homeless creates a negative connotation, and it essentially assumes that you are that, as opposed to something that you are experiencing at a point of time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't want to make it the identifier that is your identity as a person. It is just something that is happening. It is a situation that can be overcome.
I think to me the difference was like when we stopped using stakeholder and use shareholder. So I think it just takes time and just common everyday language to get used to it. But when we do, it's going to be like, oh, how come we haven't used that before?
Right.
Yeah.
I like it.
Desi?
Hi, everybody. I got a question about mental health. Mental health is wide in the shelters when you're dealing with being in the shelters. When you're dealing with a whole lot of rejection. I want to know, did y'all talk to anybody that have this problem in their facilities or anything, and tell me if y'all did, can you tell me about it?
Let me make sure I'm understanding your question. So you're saying mental health is like a wide issue, and especially when you say rejection, is that rejection?
Housing, what, like trying to get housing and stuff like that.
I see. Okay. It wasn't discussed. I think the issues surrounding mental health and expectations around mental health are very difficult, and they are person-centered. So we do deal with individuals that have various mental health diagnosis and various levels of severity. And I always say we have people that have mental health diagnosis that are either diagnosed or undiagnosed, medicated and unmedicated. We have to respect people's right to choose. I think when you're dealing with rejection and you're in program, it's important to talk about the reality of rejection, the pain of rejection, and then we have it moving forward, how that just is the right program for you. So it's not diminishing what the person's going through, because there is a deep level of rejection of why am I not chosen? Why not this? I think it's just the space to recognize that like rejection is kind of a part of life. And, I always tell people there just isn't enough stock ultimately. We are one program in Philadelphia competing with hundreds of others, including programs that have women and children. Including people who are already housed. So there's a lot that we're competing against. So the space is not like you are rejected because they don't like you or they weren't liking you or considering you. It just wasn't our chance. We weren't considered.
And I think
But we do recognize that people don't have to take medication at all if they are not in a space to want to. That's something you have to want to do, and we will support you with that. But if you're like, I don't want to take medication, you can't force people.
I think a big point of that is autonomy and choice, but it also goes back to staff training as well, so that they can identify these mental health symptoms and triggers and be able to work through that with them, or identify if it's a completely unsafe environment. Knowing the difference, de-escalation versus calling for help. So I think that's a big aspect of the mental health discussion. And I think at the conference, I heard a little bit about that, talking more about like how the brain functions under stress and long-term trauma. And I think that we experience a lot of that at Bethesda Project with chronically homeless folks who have been outside for a long amount of time. And that's only compounded the already mental health diagnoses that they have. So when we can understand more fully how the brain is functioning in those moments of stress, we're able as providers to work through it with them more understandingly, not necessarily more easily, but with more support. Because we can say to ourselves, in this time right now, the brain is not functioning properly. It's not reasonable. It's only in a survival mode. So if I'm asking you to do something that seems reasonable in the moment, it might not be possible. So understanding that means that we can ask those questions later. And once we're safe, we can attack the goals. But we can't get there until we have a better understanding of what's going on in that brain while we're working with someone day in and day out.
I see that we have a question in the chat. Was there a takeaway that we came back and implemented it at our program immediately, or that we plan to implement soon?
I think for me, it is the importance of lived experience and having those folks at the table and at every part of every discussion that involves decision making in a program, or even just their own lives. I mean, that's number one. But if it involves the program that they are a part of, we want their voice to be a leading voice in the discussion. So at least at our site, we're trying to inspire the voice through the storytelling. So we're noticing that when we're asking questions, we're not getting too much response. So trying to figure out how to jumpstart that creativity to start asking questions. Why can't we do it this way? What if it was like this? And trying to tease that out. So I think we're in the early stages where it's mostly trying to get involvement and trying to get engagement. But hopefully that turns into something where it's a great roundtable with folks with lived experience, with experience through employment, and we get to a better place, whatever that looks like.
We've seen an increase in guests that not only want to live together, but they meet at shelter. They want to continue that community, continue that friendship. So they'll talk to their case managers and say, hey, link our accounts together. We want to be considered as like a unit. And we've had some interesting conversations. I think it's a little early. There are some people who are like, oh, this is a great one. This works perfectly. You have some people who are like, did you guys talk about, who's paying this or certain behaviors? And we look to actually increase those conversations with people. We've had guys, guests who've moved in together, and it's great. They work well, like, they have their own unit, their own space, and they're totally fine. And some our case managers are currently looking at units for two people instead of one, and considering maybe a studio, and you just kind of split the space up, or a 1-bedroom in the den, or a 2-bedroom, or even just a 1-bedroom in the living room. So we've looked at that creative way to house 2 people in 1 unit as opposed to 1. And we'll tell them, maybe you should talk to this person about this. And we may have individual conversations of, so how is rent being paid? How is savings being paid? Did you both talk about who does dishes, who's cleaning? And it's an early conversation, but it's the space of things you don't always think about. And we actually just recently had, I was in supervision with one of the team members, and one person's like, I want to live with this person. A week later, like, I do not want to live with this person. I don't know how I thought that, but they had someone else who they're considering, and that seems a lot more promising. And they have better shared interests. They have better kind of moving styles and things like that. So it's just having those discussions and saying, yeah, we support that. We encourage guests, make a community member, make a friend, because you may have more success moving in together than alone. And some guys have, like I said, have tried it and it's been successful. It's just matching personalities can be hard, because with 150 people, some personalities you can see from the gate are like perfectly meshed, and others you're like, okay, it's a little more challenging, requires a little bit more openness to that conversation, but it's been well. It's been good. Any other questions? About 7 more minutes. Any last minute thoughts that people may have?
I would just thank you so much. You guys are really amazing. The work you do, your compassion, empathy, professionalism. It's really makes my heart full. The work that you guys all do, and it was very interesting. This luncheon, learn and lunch, or whatever it was called today. I appreciate the information, and it definitely helps me here at the visitor center with the population that I have. So you guys are a great resource, and thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, if there are no other questions, I think that's a really great spot to end on. And if you do think of something else after the call, you can reach out to Kharisma or Stephen or myself, and we can try and get those questions answered. But great job. Thank you to Kharisma and Stephen for their time today and sharing their knowledge. Thank you. You did a fabulous job. And yeah, thanks to all of you who took time out of your day to participate in some thoughtful discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.